Hi, everyone. Great to have you on tonight, and hopefully we can help educate you a little bit more about the CRP program and kind of the differences between general and continuous CRP. So I'll share my screen here. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Yep.
Okay, good deal. Yeah, enrolling your land in CRP. So today's agenda, we're going to talk about the Farm Service Agency and just important CRP information. We're going to talk about initial goals that you should have as a farmer when you work with this program. General CRP, continuous CRP, contract management, as far as your mid-contract management, what options you have in order to get the best growth initially and to continue to have the best diverse stand that you can get, and kind of your next steps to move forward with that program. So on average, about 20% of the farm loses money, 20% of the farm breaks even, and 60% of the farm turns a profit. So this is kind of going towards, you want to try and keep obviously your farm in the green. And to do that, you want to utilize maybe those resources that are that part of the farm that is not the most productive as far as farm ground, but it could be a great native grass area. So that's kind of where CRP leads us. So we want you to start thinking about opportunities for CRP on your farm. And where are the areas where you could have maybe a nice wildlife stand or just a nice grass area that could serve as some kind of nesting, possibly winter cover, or a good food source for wildlife. So you could turn that other picture into something more like this. Very aesthetically pleasing. Might just be a neat spot. We could have a lot of different wildlife, a lot of different pollinators, and a neat ecosystem on your farm. CRP is also a great option if you have this issue with the flooding. I believe this is along the Spoon River down in one of my areas in Knox County. And so this is a very dynamic river that tends to flood more than it should. And so in order to help save your profit, CRP might be a good option. Another one with this program would be possibly a wetland reserve program if you are dealing with this problem a lot. There's just another pretty picture of what your farm could be if you enroll it in the right program. And we can talk about that and how to get the best bang for your buck. So first you need to know as a farmer, what are your farm goals? Is it money? Is it conservation or recreation? Is it to leave a legacy? So the CRP sign up and other conservation programs can help you meet those goals, and we can make those ends meet. Something to think about for your goals is, do you want to have more of a simple process? Would you rather just do something like a CP2, which we'll get into, which is just a native grass stand. Sometimes only a couple of grasses and a couple flowers just makes it a little bit more easy as far as management, or even like a grass waterway, something that helps with soil erosion. Or do you want to go more high quality, more diverse mixes like your pollinator, maybe creating more of a wildlife corridor with your CP4D, kind of the Cadillac of all the types of CRP. Do you need more of a wetland practice for those wet spots? Or are you looking for that pollinator just to get that really neat prairie back on your land? Or is it something more for private hunting? You like to have your own area to hunt pheasant or quail, or even maybe create an edge feathering for turkey and deer. So there's lots of options that CRP can provide you. And so it just really goes back to what your goals are as a producer and how you want your land to look. So then we get into general sign up. And general sign up is something that comes around, I believe it's once a year. And it's more for specific types of practices. And there's a specific acreage that is available for certain signups. So we'll get into that. So like I said, yeah, General CRP is unique. The sign up runs until March 11th. So it actually started this 1st of February, I believe, or even the 31st of January through March 11th. And so we still have plenty of time to get in to talk with your FSA office, call your NRCS and Pheasants Forever biologist and get some information about what your goals are and how we can help meet those goals. The sign up is competitive, so it is a ranking system. So we're going to get into that a little bit in the next slide, but your contracts will start on October 1st. So we want to make sure to have everything together as far as what your plan is for conservation by October 1st, and it should be implemented. Start your seeding at that time. And they are 10 or 15-year contracts, and depending on your practice. Usually with trees incorporated, they're 15-year, normally like pollinator and other CP2 native grasses are 10-year contracts. And we did hear that the maximum per acre payment rate is going to be maxed out at $240 per acre. And that also changes based on what county you're in, which we'll touch in the next couple slides. So as far as eligibility requirements, you must have owned the land for 12 months. Your AGI is a very important factor. You must be below the 900,000. And your cropping history is also something that really makes CRP different than other programs under the federal NRCS. So your cropping history must be planted 4 of 6 years, which is 2012 to 2017. And the property cannot be permanently underwater, federally owned, under easement restrictions, or in any other federal program. Additional requirements different from general, that's different from CRP, from continuous CRP, is general has an erodibility index. And so that's just based on how erodible your soil is, which is how we take into the ranking, how it's a competitive offering. There's expiring CRP. So if your CRP is expiring after those 10 or 15-year contracts, you may also be eligible to re-enroll if you meet certain status and specifics that the Farm Service Agency needs to specify to you. And then conservation priority areas is another thing that's special about general CRP. Continuous CRP, you must meet the suitability and feasibility for a specific type of practice. And that's something that I believe our Farm Bill biologists can help you with and other NRCS folks as well. So something we talked about before, as far as that 240 max rental rate, that is based on your soil rental rate, which is a payment that's based off of your top 3 soil types. So not the type of CRP that you choose. Something that we can't really control and something that is just in the policy of the Farm Service Agency. But we can help you provide an estimate just based on what we know from their sheets. And then FSA will help calculate in certain incentives and other things that will ultimately give you your SSR, your soil rental rate. So here's just kind of a screenshot of just a couple counties of what we're looking at. And so I know a question that's going to come up is that some of these do have over 240 that's listed based on their SSR. And so I'm not sure how they deal with those. I think it's still capped no matter what, just because that just means that you have more valuable soil in that area. And so I believe FSA is still going to stick to their word of 240 max an acre. Like I said before, general CRP is a national ranking process. So FSA uses this environmental benefits index to evaluate and rank eligible CRP offers. Each section has a point score system and is assigned based on environmental benefits and cost. which I'll explain in the next slide a little bit more. And then that data is used whether to know whether offers applications are accepted or denied. So here's kind of the general practices that CRP offers. So CP1, introduce grasses and legumes. And then CP2, 3A and 3A are tree plantings. That CP4D is the wildlife habitat corridor. CP12 is a food plot. Rare and declining habitat with CP25 is a little bit more diverse, higher quality mix. And then the pollinator is, again, a more quality of a mix for native grasses. So to break down the environmental benefits index, it's called EBI. And these are factors that you can influence as a producer. So you can choose what type of vegetative cover and accepting a payment rate of equal or lower value that's offered to you. So that's based on these four factors. N1, the wildlife factor, N4, enduring benefits factor, N5, air quality benefits, and then N6 is your cost. So our N1 factor is the wildlife factor. And we can customize this based on your practices. So this is where what practices you choose does matter in your ranking. So it's out of possible 100 points, and it's broken down into 3 different subcategories. N1A is a wildlife habitat cover, and that can be worth 10 to 50 points. N1B is a wildlife enhancement. That could be to 0, 5, or 20 points. And N1C is something actually that you can't control. It's whether you're in this one of these wildlife priority zones over here. And that will give you just a little bit extra points, either 0 or 30 points, which really does help boost your score. And that's just to focus in on areas that really do need priority wildlife habitat. So you kind of pull those 3 factors together and they equal that N1 number. And I'll break it down a little bit more in the next couple of slides here. So your N1 wildlife, for example, CP1 is an introduced grass and legume, so 10 or 40 points. Introduced grasses are usually bromes, fescue, bluegrass. Usually not the most wildlife friendly. We usually try not to point towards those. So that would be your lower scale, either 10 or 40 points, depending on how many different varieties that you add into that mix. But what we more like to do is to add CP2, the native grasses and legumes, like prairie grasses, like Indian grass, big blue stem, your grasses that are really going to be the best option for your wildlife nesting cover, winter cover, and your food source. So those are 20 to 50 points. Your CP3, tree planting or hardwood plantings, that could be 10, 20, 30, or 50 points. And again, those practices are 15-year. So it's a little bit more changing the landscape for a longer amount of time. So it just depends on what you plant and how long you plant it. So I kind of went into a little bit more depth here. So with your CP1, like I said, the orchard grass, timothy, red top, your FORB component includes a minimum of 20 native species. So we want to make sure to still have that good crude protein source for wildlife. And it has all of these different EBI factors that we add up to get that overall N1 score. And these are just examples, I believe. So this would be a CP2 mix, maybe be more 50 points. Have a lot different native species. That's a better, like I said, a crude protein source, more nutrients for your wildlife, more what they naturally like to eat and are able to digest. And so that would be your EBI score lineup example points for that kind of practice. So we had 73, I believe the other one was 65 if you want to do CP1. And then kind of another one is CP25, which is more of a tall grass historical community. It's more for like a remnant If you have a site that you know historically had prairie or savanna or some kind of declining ecosystem, we would like to restore that. And so you'd get even more points, even a total up to 100 points for those kind of planting practices. This is kind of just another run through the CP4D, permanent wildlife habitat. That's more of creating a shrub, a tree, and a prairie area. So you kind of have all your bases covered as far as cover-wise, as food sources, kind of all of the turkey, your deer, your pheasant, quail, rabbits, pollinators, everything can kind of flourish in that kind of habitat. And then we have our specific CP42 pollinator habitat for 50 points, just because it's so diverse with the different kind of plantings between your forbs, your grasses, and your legumes in that mix. The next factor is your N1B, which is your wildlife enhancement. So if you want a pollinator habitat plot added in addition to your CP2, that would be about 20 points. So you're already helping yourself create a beautiful land, but also helping pollinators and helping other species have just a better food source, better cover, and beautifying your property. Another option would be a conversion of your monocultural stand. For example, if you have straight brome grass from a CP1, if you added possibly a pollinator plot, or even in this next mention, a food plot, that could give you an increased points of 5 points or even 20 points if you convert that entire monoculture to natives instead of the non-native mix or the cool season grasses. And that's just what your pollinator could look like. So 50 points possible if the whole field, or 20 points if it's an enhancement. So with General, you can also add more acres than you can with the continuous CRP for pollinators. So a lot of big pollinator folks like to jump on this CRP, this General sign up, because there is areas 10% of the farm or less, so 10 acres. So it's a little bit more competitive, but usually it's more open than continuous CRP that has that 10-acre cap or 10% of your farm. Kind of a fun note about honeybees, they contribute 19 billion to US crop production without pollinators. 75% of plant species in the world and can't produce fruits or seeds. So pollinators not only help us, they help agriculture, they help wild game have a good food nutrition source. And yeah, it's very pretty to look at. So here's kind of a monoculture conversion option. That would be 20 points to convert this. And you could do that by chemical suppression, disking, and interseeding. And so we could put more native stand in here instead of this cool season grass monoculture. And here's a food plot, 5 points for that enhancement. And it's limited to 10% or 5 acres of your field. And must be planted every year, and there is not a cost share option for food plots, but you will get those additional points to help your ranking status for your CRP. The next factor is N4. N4 and its evaluation of the likelihood for certain practices to remain in place beyond your CRP contract. So you get the most points for trees, less points for pollinator, and no points for other types. So just kind of the longevity of the practice and how it can help either your soil erodibility index in the long term, and how it can serve as a more permanent type of habitat in future years, even after that contract expires. So with trees, you'd have more points. And then N5 is your air quality benefits or your carbon sequestration. So that's also dealing with trees, and more if this is a safe practice for state acres. And so there's a little bit longer terms. I believe those can be 15-year, but they're primarily trees is what we would have the most carbon sequestration And so those rank a little higher than your food plot, your CP1 or your CP2. And the last factor that you can play into is cost. So the formula for cost, N6 and then NA plus B, that's determined after sign up. So offers with a lower per acre rental rate may increase chances of being accepted. And you can reduce your payment offer based % below the maximum payment rate offer. So you can take a reduction in that payment. Based on if you take a 15% payment, that gives you higher points payment reduction, or if you take a 1% reduction payment, that would change your point score as well. So that's something that you can influence. And then if you have a lower rental rate, that is also something that's factored into cost that would affect your overall score. So here's kind of a breakdown of what I was saying. % below maximum payment rate. So if you only take 5%, that's only 10 points. But if you take 15, that'd be 25 points. So you can really boost your score there by changing that payment rate, what you would accept. You can improve your EBI in lots of ways, and that will increase the likelihood that your offer will be accepted. So if you have like 100 acres of CP1, then we could change that either to this other scenario. We can convert it to a 50-point native mix under CP2, which would increase your N1A, your wildlife factor. You could offer 10% of the acreage in pollinator, and that would gain other additions such as your wildlife factor, your carbon sequestration, and your longevity of practice. So there's other ways that you can kind of factor it in, and this would kind of how it would tabulate up as far as your EBI score with those factors. So this is kind of your brome grass scenario, probably a CP1, and this is with your different enhancements. If you were to add a pollinator, if you add a food plot, that enhancement, if you were to change it maybe to trees, so maybe this is more of a CP4D, you have a trees, and another air quality benefits. And so you'd get your total of 100 points. That would really be a neat area for wildlife. And you can really see the point difference between what these factors add up to be and how you can influence that differently based on what practices that you choose. So my thoughts about general CRP, keep it simple when applying. Definitely, if you're willing to do the work, I say go for it. It'll definitely be worth it, even just to show off to your friends and family, to have a place where you can go, just like your private park area, you can just walk through and observe all the different wildlife. If you're a hunter, I mean, it's definitely a benefit to have that ground, as public hunting is hard to come by, which we are trying to change. But if you do want to do less, there are options for that as well. You can just go for more of an enhancement for a food plot, or just do a small pollinator plot instead of the whole field. So there's lots of different options to make CRP your own. So here's kind of an example of doing the work and going for higher quality. This is a brome stand, and it's just about 10 points for your N1 score. Not a lot going on here, not a lot of great habitat, not very pretty. But you could increase your quality of work and add in diverse natives, CP2, and then CP42, and you could get up to 50 points for that enhancement, or even for changing for a monoculture to do only a 50% of that field, or you can change it entirely as well to something more like this. Lots of different forbs, lots of different seeds for different kinds of birds and pollinator, places for pheasants and quail to walk through to get insects in the spring, good winter cover, much more viable habitat for wildlife and just aesthetically more pleasing. something that we want to remember is that nesting season is April 15th to August 1st, and there is no management to be done on your CRP during that time. But you have a pretty good window otherwise to conduct any kind of management burning from March to April, and then even from August all the way through December if you have the time. And so really just keep in mind with that nesting season with your CRP. Kind of touching on management just a little bit. Your options really are mow, spray, burn, or disc, or respray. To get your best, also interseed should be on there. But mowing is no longer a cost share option, but you can definitely spray. Highly recommend burn. Disking if it's not able to be burned or sprayed. And lots of times with a spray, you'll have to respray as well. But interseed is also a good option if you have some bare spots. But that's something that we can kind of discuss with you one-on-one if you have questions. Yeah, ideally you would want to plant diverse natives. Seed costs, I should have double checked this a little bit, but seed costs are about 100 per acre, and CP42 is 170 per acre. So it's really not too terrible as far as price difference. And the value that you're going to get out of your CP, I mean, CP42, it is a 10-year contract. So it definitely lends itself to this difference in seed costs. But I think it's worth it to make that investment for wildlife in the area to create that habitat, and just for you to have that own pride that you did help out in the area. Another monoculture, convert monoculture by interseeding. And that would get you about 20 points in food plots. So that's kind of something we talked about as far as management, or even just like interseeding, you can add in a food plot. This is a little bit more about management. It's easier to interseed. Just need to disturb the soil. I think that's it. Oh, here we go. Here's one more. So my thoughts about general CRP. So CP4Ds are called the Cadillac of practices for a reason. They are a lot of work. You want to put in your pollinator plot or your 42 or your CP2. You have a shrub cover, and you also need trees. And so it's a lot to upkeep, but it's a really neat corridor if you're willing to put in the work. Applying for general CRP has its pros and cons. There is the opportunity that you could get accepted and have a really neat opportunity to kind of retire your land for 10, 15 years and create a neat wildlife corridor. Or there's also the option where your ranking just doesn't turn out. But either option, either continuous or general, can be a win-win in the end, rather than just having a field that's just not producing year after year. We can make CRP work for you. So now I'm going to hand it over to my coworker, Brody, and he is going to tell us about continuous CRP.
Thank you, Olivia. I'll go ahead and share my screen here really quick. So continuous CRP is a little bit different than general CRP, as you're not necessarily competing for the same short-term pot of money. And so a lot of the practices are pretty similar, except with continuous, it's a lot harder to enroll a larger piece of land. It's mostly for enrolling smaller portions or field borders or things like that. So with continuous CRP, practices that are they're meant to address wildlife concerns, soil and water concerns, habitat concerns, all sorts of things to just help conserve the lesser productive portions of your farm ground or recreational ground. There's a sign up as long as acres are available, and oftentimes they have incentive payments that will help you get you into or help you with the cost of upstarting. Once it's like a little bonus when you get signed up for it. And the contracts are for 10 to 15 years most generally. And there's something called Clear 30 that I'll cover a little bit later that has a little bit of a longer contract term for re-enrollments. Some of the practices that you see here are some of the ones that you can use for continuous that are available. CP9s, shallow water areas, filter strips, CP23As are wetland restorations, and their CP23s, its counterpart. CP33s are habitat buffers, also known as field borders that you may have heard of. CP42s are what Olivia spent a lot of time talking about with this pollinator, with a lot of pollinator forbs and plants like that. And CP43 is prairie strips, which I'll cover right about here. And there's others available as well. CP9s are supposed to be a shallow water area for really areas that stay pretty wet. They have to be under 10 acres in size, and they have to be within 10 to 20, 120 feet, a buffer between them and the ground that you're not enrolling. And it has to be a 6 to 18 inch average water depth, which will really be beneficial for a lot of waterfowl and a lot of upland game birds, a lot of ground nesting birds, just a lot of wildlife opportunity there for a more shallow water area. The CP9s do require engineering and dirt work. The engineering you can get at your local NRCS office, which we can help you do and line out how we think would be the best way to get it done. And the dirt work is something that you will have to handle to be able to build either structures or berms or things to kind of help dam in some of the water. CP21s are filter strips. As you can see, this combine's not looking too good on the right, being a little too wet there. Filter strips have to be 50 to 120 foot wide. They're really just a grass buffer along streams to make sure that you don't get those areas that are often too risky to try. It really helps kind of conserve a lot of the water runoff and a lot of the soil that's trying to escape your field and help kind of keep it there. It'll really help retain a lot of soil and improve your quality as well. So as you can see, this is an area that's really, let's go back, an area that's really wet. And so farming up right up next to it can get a little bit costly, and you're really not gaining anything from it. A lot of it's just running off. As you can see, it's really bare there. And it's just showing a lot of signs of erosion, ephemeral gullies, a lot of weeds starting to come in by the bank sides. And let's see. Something like this, you can start to see really how bare it is on each side of that waterway, and it's really not productive. And so by installing filter strips there, it'll really help start to filter out a lot of the soil that's trying to get into that stream, really slow down a lot of the erosion. And it can really turn out into something beautiful like this with using a lot of native species and things to really stop the flow of water and really just look good doing it. CP23As are wetland restoration. And these are something that, these are the wetland restoration that are not in the 100-year floodplain, unlike its counterpart CP23, which I'll talk about here in a minute. The sites must have hydric soils. That is a universal for 23s. And so it'll be a 4-to-1 upland area to wetland area. So you'll have to have a little bit of area around that as well. You can make it as easy or as hard as you want to be. You can plant it to native seeds when it's bare, and you can break some tile and really just let the natural water take over, or you can hire people out to build you berms and put in structures to help retain water. And food plots are allowed as well in 23As, which really just make it a well-rounded program for a lot of wildlife and habitat purposes. So here's an area that obviously could use a little bit of help there, and it's really, with seeing this area here up in the top right, you can see it's really just washed out and not doing any good. And you see they're trying to farm up next to it, and it's just not turning out. It's running off a lot of water and things. And so by putting in a buffer and a wetland, it can really help square off your field and make it a lot more useful to you, a lot more easier for you to handle, and help you get a little bit of payment on the side for that stuff that's really not making you anything anyway. For a 23, this is the counterpart to the one I just mentioned. It has to be within the 100-year floodplain. It also must have hydric soils to be able to retain the water. And the site must be within the 100-year floodplain, and it has to be a 3-to-1 upland area to wetland area. And just as I mentioned before, as this 23A, you can break tile and let the natural water stay where it wants to be, or you can build structures and be able to control how it comes in and out. And so you can really make it your own. And food plots are the same as with the last one. It just really helps make it a really good program for wildlife and habitat. So with this area here, you can see how it's really starting to kind of take the banks away and really wash away from a lot of that field area. And by putting in the buffer, just like the last one, but this with the floodplain being here, it's obviously a lot more at risk. And by putting in that buffer area in the wetland, like the last one, it really squares off your fields and makes it a lot more easier to handle. CP33s are habitat buffers, also known as field borders. And so these are great for upland birds, and they really help you square off your fields. They can be within 30 to 100 feet wide, but they have to be along all edges of the perimeter of the field. So I think they used to be able to be on a portion of the field. Now they must cover the entirety of the perimeter. Except for now, you can, they do allow you to have pivot corners. I have the county of Tazewell County, and they use a lot of pivot corners, and they plant those, or they have those in habitat buffers, and they really seem to be doing a lot. And I hear a lot of good things about it. And so a lot of people are seeing a lot more native birds such as quail and pheasants over there. Just it really helps out, just adding a little bit extra habitat to areas that have little to no. And the average seed cost can be as little as about $91 per acre for planting these areas. So it's really, you can spend more money and get a more diverse mix to have something a little bit nicer, a little bit with some prettier flowers, things that you like. But really, it's not a horrible way to go about it, and it can be as low as about 91, so that's not horrible. And there on the right, you can see some of the areas that you could turn into habitat, just areas that are wasted otherwise, might as well be something good. And so there you can see that that'd be a good little area for a lot of habitat for wildlife. And here you can see a good perimeter for your field borders that really show. You can see the outer edges are really scraped away. A lot of it's getting a lot of water runoff, and they're not getting as close as they would want to be anyway. So that ground might as well be doing something for the farmer rather than trying to fight nature, which doesn't always end up well. Working with nature and helping build a border like that will really help you get away from those riskier areas that aren't making you much money and provide a lot of good habitat while doing it. And as I said before, a lot of people are seeing a lot of good things from CP33s. They're seeing a lot more pheasants and quail and other wildlife really utilizing it. Rabbits, other things are really seeing things in places that they'd never seen them before. And a lot of people we've been seeing a massive habitat decline. That is the biggest risk to upland game birds and most wildlife today is the habitat loss. And by using CP33s and practices like those, you really get to see a difference. And I've heard it firsthand several times of people really starting to see birds and other wildlife that they haven't seen in years. CP42 is what Olivia really hammered on in her portion of the presentation. That's pollinator. Pollinator is beginning to be really popular around my area and has been for quite a while now. It's really a beautiful way to provide some habitat, and really it's just gorgeous to look at. It has to be above half an acre, but it has to be under 10 acres or 10% of the farm, whichever is smaller. So it has to be within that little window there. The average cost of seed is $200 to $250 per acre, which is a little bit higher, but you really get a good batch of seed and a good stand of beautiful flowers that really benefit in the area. It's great for it provides a lot of habitat, like I was saying. It's good for a lot of seed production and insects underneath them for your ground nesting birds that we care so dearly about here. And it also provides a lot of great nesting habitat and things like that. And also pollinators, as Olivia touched on, it really helps your crops. Is the more pollinators that you bring in, the more pollinators go into your field as well. As long as they're staying localized in an area, they have an ample opportunity to really benefit crops in the area and help them pollinate. CP43s are prairie strips. They are a grass strip along the edges of the field, or they can also be along the contour lines of your field, wherever you feel like they should be, as long as they're a reasonable distance away from each other that will be outlined in the program. They have to be 30 to 120 feet wide, and they cannot consume more than a quarter of the property. It doesn't have to be a pollinator mix. A lot of people do pollinator mixes. That you can do taller grasses. You can do things that would have deeper root systems, really catch a lot of that soil. And when they catch a lot of that soil, it creates like a soil backup. It's like a traffic jam that really stops a lot of that erosion and really keeps a lot of soil in place and keeps it from going into the watershed. So the CP43 prairie strips has really been showing a lot of good things. There's studies out of Iowa State that have really been showing some promise on really keeping a lot of the erosion and nutrients in the soil there in the field. And here's a picture from Iowa State. It shows a really good area, and if you have these, and especially some of the more at-risk areas, you'll start to see a lot of berms lining up with all the soil it's catching because they have such deep root systems that the soil won't make it through there. So you'll start to see how much work it's actually doing, and they seem to be doing a really good job by how the studies have been going. Clear 30 is something I mentioned just a touch earlier. It is a 30-year re-enrollment program for things such as, it's not for every program, but if you were already enrolled in a waterway or 23s, 23As, the wetlands, things like that, if you're already in those and you're up for re-enrollment, you can potentially get re-enrolled in a 30-year program to really help you keep the ground, or to keep the property in keeping the soil and water in the healthy state that it's already at, rather than turning it back into something that could be more harmful. So you must be previously enrolled, and they will make annual payments for the entire 30-year contract. So it really is a pretty good deal. And they also provide sign-up bonuses as well. I believe they're $100 or so. Still, it just helps. It's a little nice incentive. Odd areas and partial field enrollment. A lot of these odd areas, and as we were talking earlier, that really are just kind of good for nothing. It's really good to have them. Those are the important sections that we would really like to see in these kind of programs. Especially areas that are difficult to access, such as overlapping roads, as it says, less productive ground, may have deer damage. A lot of these areas that are causing you a lot of harm, or causing farm managers or everybody just a lot of difficulty, that would just be easier if they weren't there. It's just as easy to get a little bit of payment out of them through these programs and to not have to deal with them, and obviously making great habitat along the way. This is a great program for these type of odd areas. And as you can see here, there's a field with some fingers, and as you can see along here, there are little sections that are really hard to turn around in. You can see they're scraping, they're starting to go. There's going to be a lot of erosion in those little sections, especially if there's slopes there, which there are in a lot of timber fingers and things like that. You really start to see a lot of change if you start to square those off, like as you can see there. If you start to square those off, then it's a lot less hassle for you. It provides you a little bit of payment, and you don't have to deal with the hassle of dealing with them and the yields that they hardly produce. So it really just makes sense to be able to do something with ground that is hardly productive and hard to work with. Squaring up fields, as I was just mentioning, it really helps a lot of things that you won't think about necessarily. It can help you to reduce fuel consumption. The less area that you're going around, the less fuel you're spending, it saves money for you. Less wear and tear on equipment. That's everybody hopes that they can get through the season with the limited amount of wear and tear and less things that you have to fix means quicker you can get out of there. And so the less area you got to do, the better that'll be. You can spend less time, as we were just mentioning, and make fewer turns, which is very nice when you're squaring up fields to be able to just go back and forth, back and forth. Here you can see an area that's mostly square, except you got a little finger sticking out. And if you do something like this, if you use like a field border, the habitat borders, or however, the prairie strips, you can do those sections in those and really square off your field. It's less hassle for you, and you have a really square field, and you're doing there's a lot of habitat there as long as it's within the right widths. And so it can really do a lot of good. State areas for wildlife enhancement, acres for wildlife enhancement, safe ground. Safe ground is something that we're trying to get more of in Illinois. There's a lot in Western Illinois. There's a little bit in my area around Normal and especially the areas in like Livingston County and the eastward. Those are areas where there are a endangered species or species of concern that the federal government is worried about, and so they're willing to make exceptions that they usually wouldn't to help put more ground into CRP and help preserve more ground and habitat. And so for these acres, the exceptions that they'll make is they'll start to they'll just try to make it easier to enroll, and they're trying to do that or the reason that they're doing that is to try to put more of the habitat that will make the endangered species flourish by having more of that. And so it'll bypass some of the restrictions, and it makes it where you can, especially in continuous, rather than only being able to do small sections, it really helps you put in more of the field. You can enroll whole fields. And so it really makes it, as long as you're within that zone, it really makes it a lot easier to, enroll big areas in different practices. Here's a little prairie field. And so say you have a re-enrollment in this big square field, and you see the little drainage just going through the middle of it. And you can see there that the area in the middle has a natural waterway going through it. And so if we do this and we put some field borders on the edge there, and then if your area happens to be in the safe zone, we can enroll that whole thing in safe to be able to avoid you having to go near it. And it makes it so much easier to put it in, and it'll be great acreage for a lot of wildlife. Contract managements. Every contract will need a management option. There's, as Olivia was mentioning, there's different ways you can do mid-contract managements or other managements. Spraying, disking, burning is really good for all these native practices I was talking about through this presentation. Burning is the way that they were designed to work with from way back when the Native Americans were using the landscape. It's how they were evolved to work, and it's really good, and it shows to be the clearest way to handle the native species today. And so you'll need to perform maintenance or a management within, usually on a 10-year contract, it's the 4 to 6 year area. So those 3 years within that, you'll have to do consecutive maintenance, such as burning, if you would have to burn a third of the property each year. And I believe on a 15-year contract, it's 6 through 9. But typically, you'll have to have the pre-approved activities by FSA. They'll have to outline in your contract what you will be doing as your mid-contract management when you sign off on your papers. And so what should you do now? What you should do is contact your local NRCS office or your FSA office and really start thinking about what you would want to do and develop a plan. Contact us. We would love to hear from you. We love working with landowners such as yourself that are interested in putting things in CRP or interested in doing things on your own. It's really good to, like it says to here, it's really important if you're going to speak with FSA to bring a map and outline your objectives and have an initial plan in mind. So if you contact us, we'll really help you be able to outline what we think would be helpful for your ground and how we would see your vision put on a paper, and how we would think that the way that these practices could help you. That way, when you have the ability to go into the FSA office, you'll have everything ready, and they'll be able to just put you through and really start to get the ball rolling. And here's a list of all the, and shows kind of the areas where all of our Farm Bill biologists are. And I believe that here's some partnering agencies, but I believe that we are on to the portions, the question portions. If I don't know if Katie wants to lead that or how we're going to be answering all of your questions in the chat.
So yeah, we did have a couple questions that came in our Q&A buttons. That would be good. We did answer them, but it's also good to let everyone kind of hear the answers to those, since not everybody is able to see screens, and we do have some individuals that have called in. One of the questions we got is there an opportunity to add shrubs like native dogwood or viburnums to one of the practices like CPDs or CP4 or CP42 in a field of CP2? Can they be planted in pockets or strips as a way to diversify cover? And so I'll let the biologist, if there's any more other than Dallas's typed up answer, which I will read, is you can diversify your cover with shrubs and other species. Unfortunately, CP2 and CP42 do not allow shrubs. However, CP4D and CP38s do allow for diverse cover or multiple practices to be placed on the same farms. An example would be a windbreak or a shelter break on an outside edge of the pollinators. So that's some of the practices you can kind of diversify with adding shrubs in, but some of the practices are pretty strict on what they do or do not allow. We also were asked if prairie strips can be grazed. They are starting to bring the grazing into as a management practice. It's not very widespread yet, but we are seeing it, especially out west, get used a lot more. If the NRCS does require grazing manage, or does allow you to do grazing management, you do require a grazing management plan, and your rent arrays will be reduced by 40%, since the additional income will be coming off of those livestock that are going to be grazed upon that. And then we also did have a question about not realizing pheasants ate insects. Insects are extremely important, not only to pheasants, but also to quail and turkey, especially with a lot of the upland birds. Most chicks die within 48 hours due to the fact they cannot thermoregulate themselves. So they absolutely need that protein and fat that comes from eating a good variety of insects. So that way they're able to build up that layer of body fat so they don't die due to exposure from the elements. We did also have some questions. So did Bureau County get a PF rep? So we do actually have in Illinois, our biologists are partnered through the USDA and the NRCS. So the NRCS is who determines where our biologist positions are located. So not yet is the question that we do have a position that will be covering Bureau County. We do have an individual that is hired, but they will not be coming on until the end of March. So they will be coming on after the CRP sign up. But we do have an individual, and we will share that information on our social media page and on our website when that individual transfers over. They are a PF employee in another state. So towards the end of the March, be on the lookout for that information. We do have a biologist that will be coming into there. Along with, we do have 3 other biologist positions that are currently open. And we are accepting applications for. We just don't know when those individuals will come on, as we have not hired them yet. So good news for Bureau County. You guys are getting a biologist soon. So another question, and to the PF biologist, if you've got the answer for this, feel free to unmute yourself. So is wetland restoration in floodplains that you cover the same as a WRP, or are they a different program? So if one of you biologists can kind of explain the WRP program, I believe I did share the Crp program information earlier. There may be some confusion with that. So I'll turn that over to one of you. So it looks like Preston answered it. WRP is permanent, whereas CRP is a 10 to 15-year contract. So that is the difference between those. The Crp program is also another program that recently started up in Illinois. That's ran through the Department of Natural Resources. It does work very closely with the FSA as well. That's also another program for that. And then all right, and then we also did have a question that came in. We did have an email that came in. We had an individual that wanted to know about the fact that if you inherited your farm and did not have that cropping history, if there is exemptions that are able to happen for individuals. Preston, could I have you unmute yourself and answer that one for me, since you kind of talked about that in the email, in our emails a little bit about there is a way for individuals, but it's usually a long process.
Okay, so if you purchase a property that the farmer and or landowner did not report that land to FSA, so there's no record of cropping history on that property, what you have to do is get that farmer, producer, landowner to sign off that there was cropping or that there was crops planted on that area, along with 2 neighbors. Then you have to take your case with the signatures to your soil and water, not your soil and water board, your county committee board, and say, look, this was under crops. I'd like to do a CRP on it, but I don't have the cropping history. They'll vote on it. If approved, they can approve you from anywhere from 10% to 100%, depending on what they decide. It does take about 2 years to get everything. They like to have aerial maps and everything else that they can get to get permission to do this. So best thing to do is go into your FSA offices, double check, make sure that you have a plan, or not a plan, a farm number, tract number associated with that land, so that when you do go in there and say, I'm ready to go with CRP, that's already out of the way. So yeah.
Thanks for that clarification, Preston. Let's see. All right, so we also had a question come in. What is the cost per acre to seed an acre of CP4D program, and do you have to maintain it yearly? So the cost to seed can range very wildly on any of these, depending upon what seed mixes you use. You can have it as low as, depending on what's required, to $90, depending on where you find it from, up to, I've seen seed mixes that are $700. But it does not require a yearly maintenance. It does require a maintenance halfway through the contract at least, which is typically, it can be within year 4 to 6, but many people usually do it in year 5.
Katie, something else on that. With CRP, it is recommended that you have maintenance on it from years 3 through 6 or something along those lines. That doesn't mean just, you get to year 3, year 4, and you go back out and look at it. CRP is like your farm, like your row crops are. If there's weeds that pop up in your row crops, what are you going to do? You're going to go spray them. Same concept applies with CRP. I see too many times where landowners don't go out to, sorry about my dogs. They go out to find their fields that are full of trees and stuff like that. So, yearly inspections do lead to a lot less work down the road. So, a little bit here and there goes a long way.
Right, and so we did also get a question. Part of it didn't show up in the public, but I think the answer did show up. We had asked if you're doing a wetland project, is berm construction cost shared or not? Does depend on the program. most do cost share the berm and dirt work, although if it's an existing project and you've done it before it was enrolled, they won't share. But there are other programs depending upon your location in the state that you may have access to some additional funding. For example, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is doing some targeted wetland restoration throughout Illinois. So this is a good question that we get quite a bit. This was sent to privately. If you have been renting out land to a farmer, when you are when are you required to inform them of your plans to enroll into CRP or WRP? So Dallas, raised your hand on that. Go ahead and take that one away, Dallas. You're probably a good one since you do farm yourself on the side and also do work with a lot of tenant farmers in your farming practice. So go ahead and take that one away.
Yeah, I receive that question a lot because in my area, which is East Central Illinois, so around the greater Champaign area, probably 85 to 90% of the land is cash rent. And where it actually comes down to and what the FSA holds is whoever is receiving funds for that contract. So if they are written on that contract, it comes down to the responsibility of that person to make sure that the management is conducted. And usually the office will send out a letter stating that management is upcoming. And then in which case, typically it is done to where the landowner will receive that notification and then hire out his farmer or renter to conduct the management and then turn in those bills and the landowner will receive the cost share. However, if you do have power of attorney with your renter and they are on the contract, they will as well receive that same letter. And if they have the cost of the expensive management, then they would receive the cost share. So it all depends on who is on that contract, and that is the people that they will notify about upcoming management.
All right, so I believe that is all the questions that had came in. We do greatly appreciate everyone coming in to today's webinar, taking time out of your evening. We do definitely recommend reaching out to your nearest biologist, which you can find that at www.ihuntil.com. We do update our contact information for that. And as we do bring on additional staff, make sure to follow our social media pages. We will announce those staff on our social media pages along with update our website for the contact information. We do plan on having 4 to 5 positions join us in the next 6 months. So our team is growing quite rapidly in this state. But if you do have any other additional questions or if something comes up afterwards, we do encourage you to reach out to your nearest staff member. They can definitely take a look at your land, whether it's through satellite imagery or if you are on with your work area, they can schedule a site visit to have a more in-depth plan. So thank you again for everybody joining us, and we look forward to seeing you all in the future, and hopefully this spring you'll get out and be able to do some habitat improvement onto your property. Thank you, everybody, and have a good night.